During these difficult times, we're all dreaming of some much-needed rest and recreation in the sun. While you might not be able to escape just yet, here are some of the bargain getaways we'll be planning once COVID-19 restrictions are lifted, and we can travel again. Ticking the budget box is about more than cheap flights. You need to go where you can sleep and eat for as little as possible too. We can help. Here are 10 of the cheapest countries on the planet, from Caribbean bargain beaches to heavenly street food that's cheaper than chips. When the world is ready to travel again, they should be top of the list. Before we begin, we publish new videos every day, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more great content. 10. Taiwan. 2 words, street food. For less than $2, you can get a plate of fragrant rice with pork chicken on top, a large deep-fried chicken chop, or a bowl of delicious vermicelli with oysters. Food in Taiwan is delicious and ridiculously cheap. If you are a foodie on a budget, you know where to go. In cities like Taipei and Tainan, you can register for their city bikes, which cost less than $0.50 per hour per ride, and are free for the first 30 minutes. This means you can possibly get around the city all day without spending any money on transportation at all. That said, high-end food and clothing prices in Taiwan can sometimes be at US's level. Intercity traveling is either expensive with a high-speed rail, HSR, or time-consuming with slightly cheaper options. Internet is also not as cheap as the countries above. 9. Nepal. Nepal is a very cheap country to travel through, with most food, accommodation, and transport running at just a few dollars if you eat, sleep, and travel using local options. For food, while I never seem to get any stomach problems eating street food, the street food in Nepal does not have the best reputation. You can get cheap and delicious home-cooked meals in local-run small cafes though. Be very mindful when you book your accommodation online, as big corporations have taken over local homestays and turned them into boutique hotels and resorts. The local guest houses you've booked may very well be part of a big hotel chain. I suggest booking the first couple of nights online, and look for accommodation from real local guest houses when you've arrived. If you end up trekking, as long as you do so independently and avoid empty Everest itself, which costs tens of thousands of dollars, you can travel for as cheap as $10 per day on food and accommodation at the lower elevations, and closer to $20 at higher elevations on popular routes like the Annapurna Circuit. 8. Sri Lanka. Like many countries, Sri Lanka can be seen on a backpacker budget, or one can spend a small fortune there. The biggest kicker was the price of activities, such as safaris, and admission into the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. With each running about $40 to $50 per ticket, this made Sri Lanka more expensive to fully explore. That said, Sri Lanka can be done on closer to $30 per day on the days that you don't pay for expensive activities. Food, transport, accommodation, and internet are relatively cheap. One thing to note about transportation is that in some cases, taking a taxi Uber in major cities can be cheaper than renting a bike. If you can find people in your hostel to split the cost, hiring a driver for the day can be as low as $5 per person. The cheapest transportation is the train, which is delightful and, in my opinion, the best way to travel through Sri Lanka. 7. Malaysia. Being one of the most economically developed Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia is often perceived as expensive. On top of that, when I visited Malaysia for the first time, a few people told me it wasn't worth staying long. However, I ended up meeting lots of locals, more able to communicate and find more common ground with them than I had in Cambodia or Laos, and had so much fun exploring Cameron Highlands, the jungles of Borneo, and the gorgeous islands. The cherry on top? They were all affordable. An overnight bus from Kuala Lumpur to the Perhentian Islands costs as little as $8. There are so many interesting local neighborhoods and markets that are free to explore. And finally, the Malaysian cuisine is like no other. You can find food from just about any culture and it's so cheap and delicious, but not necessarily healthy. Malaysia is also one of the cheapest places in the world to get a PADI scuba diving certificate. The one thing that could make Malaysia expensive to travel in is alcohol, which is highly taxed. However, if you don't plan on drinking every night, that will not be an issue. 6. The Philippines. The Philippines is an archipelago, can cost quite a lot of both money and time to get around, and the hostel options aren't nearly as abundant as other Southeast Asia countries. While these two factors seem like a big turn-off for travelers trying to stretch their budget as far as possible, there are ways to keep your travel cost in the Philippines low. If you choose to travel during shoulder seasons, book your flights and plan your journey way in advance. It is not the country to always wing it and try to stick within 1 or 2 regions. The Philippines can still be affordable. On top of that, the country has some of the most gorgeous islands, beautiful dive sites, and hidden gems that you'd have had to pay so much more to experience in other parts of the world. In that sense, the Philippines is worth every peso you spend. 5. Indonesia. The thing about Indonesia is that it can be really cheap, or it can be quite expensive, depending on one big thing: transportation. Intercity traveling can be very time-consuming and costly, so is traveling from one island to another with a private boat. To save costs, stick with a region or two. There's a lot to do and see, and spending more time in one place will only allow you to travel deeper and have a more meaningful experience anyway. If you want to travel far and wide on a budget, my biggest tip is to take the local transportation. That's what I did backpacking in Indonesia a few years back, and sure enough, I ended up with some funny stories. On the flip side, food and drinks are cheap throughout the country, not to mention absolutely delicious too. Riding a scooter through the mountains costs very little, so does hiking, chasing waterfalls, and slouching in a hammock by the beach all day long. Hostels are plentiful, social and affordable, especially in places like the Gili Islands. 4. Northern Thailand. The north of Thailand is easy on a tight budget. As one moves south, costs for accommodation start to double, triple, and even quadruple. If you are short on time and budget for your Thailand trip, stay up north. Even in popular places like Chiang Mai and Pai, you can easily find basic dorms for less than $5. If you stick with eating street food, to each her own, but why eat pasta when you can have pad thai? Am I right? Not only will you save yourself some money, the experience will be much more authentic and delicious, too. As far as activities go, you really do not need a lot of money to enjoy your day, as most activities, such as visiting the White Temple, hiking, or gathering 3 other people from your hostel to rent a car and go on some day trips, are all affordable. 3. Cambodia. I know for sure that if you choose to rough it, you can easily spend a month in Cambodia with just $1,000. Dorms are very basic but can be dirt cheap. The same goes for food and alcohol. I also had my haggling skills to thank, as I was almost always able to talk my way out of being charged unfairly by the tuk-tuk drivers. There are some one-off expenses such as the 3-day pass to Angkor Wat, which is currently set at $62, and diving trips that add up. But there will also be days of riding bicycle in a small village and eating cheap and delicious meat skewers, when just $1 or $2 could stretch very far. Another thing is to consider the gorgeous, mostly new boutique hotels on Booking.com. They are obviously not as cheap as staying in hostels, but for the price, they are so worth it. I definitely splurge on a couple of nights and have some R&R time by the pool. 2. Vietnam. I probably had the healthiest and cheapest street food in Vietnam. Think a soup with rice noodles, cilantro, amazing broth, and a whole shank of pork for $1.50, or a cup of strong, aromatic coffee for $1. As far as transportation goes, if you rent a motorbike, you are all set for the day. However, I understand that not everyone is comfortable riding a motorbike, especially in countries like Vietnam where the road traffic can be overwhelmingly chaotic. The good news is that Grab Bike, similar to Uber but on bikes, is widely available in all major cities, and the cost is as low as $0.50 for a 2-kilometer ride. The long-distance buses and trains are also affordable and reliable. Accommodation is similarly pleasant and easier to afford than almost anywhere else in the world. 1. Laos. Back in my budget backpacking days around Southeast Asia, Laos was one of the 2 destinations where I was able to keep my budget at $30 per day, even though accommodation was slightly more expensive than most places in Southeast Asia at that time. Many of the amazing activities you can do in Laos are cheap. I paid $2.50 to see one of the most beautiful waterfalls in the world, $7 for a full-day tubing experience along the Vang Vieng River, and $6 for an awesome tiger balm massage. You can also rent a motorbike for cheap and venture off to the smaller towns, where everything is even cheaper. With more and more new hostels built to cater to the increasing number of backpackers, you can go for cheaper for longer. However, if you have a bit more to spend, you can get a gorgeous room for closer to $35 that would easily cost $100 in the US. The more subscribers we get, again, the better and more content I can continue making, so don't forget to subscribe.